Hey, power people. Welcome to Renewable Rides. I'm Gareth Evans.
And I'm Dan Roberts. We're the founding team of VECKTA, a platform and marketplace streamlining how companies buy on-site energy.
In each episode, we'll uncover the latest trends, challenges, and triumphs relating to the energy transition through the experiences of our team and our inspiring guests.
Our goal is to help companies take action to create a resilient, profitable, sustainable, and thriving energy future.
Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Renewable Rides. And today, Dan and I are honored to be joined by Julia Hamm. Julia is the former president and CEO of the Smart Electric Power Alliance. She was the founder and is today a board member of RE+. She sits on the board of multiple startups, including Volterra, and is now the partner at the Ad Hoc Group and also a board member at Puget Sound Energy. So welcome, Julia.
Thanks for having me.
Sounds like you've had an incredible career, and we're excited to dig in on that. It's diverse, it's interesting, and it sounds like you're coming off a nice decompression, which we're also excited to dig in on. But we always start by asking our guests, what are you passionate about, personal or professional?
Yeah, so I think my answer actually ties to both my personal life and my professional life. And, it's I think my passion is around connecting people. And I've always known professionally that was what I was good at. It's why I was so successful running SEPA, the Smart Electric Power Alliance, for so long, because we played this role as a convener and facilitator and really bringing together parties with different perspectives. And it wasn't really until actually I retired from SEPA and I moved from the Washington, D.C. area to Southwest Florida that I realized how core that was to how I spend my personal time as well. I moved here and, I moved to a community, Marco Island, Florida, that historically is sort of a lot of retirees, much older people, but it's been getting younger since COVID. And I got here and I started meeting other women, in their 40s and 50s and a similar stage of life. And I started meeting them through different ways. Some of them were tennis, I met at tennis, and others people I met because they were moms of kids that go to school with my kids, or all these different ways. And very quickly I realized none of these women on this small island who are in the same stage of life knew each other. So all of a sudden I found myself in this position of I basically created this group, this social group of women. And now it's taken on a life of its own and they don't need me to organize things for them. But it's it's just what I'm good at and passionate about. And, we just actually last week had a big open house happy hour at our house, with 50 people. And there were so many people that were like, I've lived on this island for so long and I don't know anyone else here except you. How is that possible? So anyway, I'm definitely passionate about connecting people, both personally and professionally.
That's so good. And where does that come from? Is that something that you grew up also kind of coordinating your friend groups, or where does that?
I just think it's in my DNA. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Well, how did you end up in the position you are today? Do you want to take us on a whirlwind tour of where you grew up, how you got into the industry, and how you ended up where you are
all the way back to where I grew up? Sure. Yeah. Well, I grew up in upstate New York in the middle of nowhere, but in a little town called Milford, New York, which the only notable thing that people might know that's close by is Cooperstown, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is. But to give you a sense of how small it was, I went to public school, and in one building was kindergarten through 12th grade, and my graduating class was 23 people. So I have yet to meet anyone. I think I met one person once who was in her 70s who said her class was 18 people. But I think that's the only person I've ever met that has me beat. And then after that, went to Cornell for school. Really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Moved to DC right out of college with an initial job that just didn't really interest me. And so found myself a year after graduation taking a position at the company that at the time actually ran SEPA. And so I was 23, essentially, when I started working with SEPA, initially as a consultant and supporting the organization. I did that for a number of years and then left for a couple of years and went to ICF International, where I was doing consulting. With my client was the EPA, and working on the Energy Star program, a whole variety of products that had the Energy Star qualification. And while I was at ICF, the SEPA board actually came back and said, "Hey, listen, we want to make a change. Like, what would you think about coming to run SEPA for us?" And at that point, again, there had actually never been any SEPA employees. They just had the consulting company that provided services to them.
Wow.
And so they said, "We're thinking about like actually hiring our first full-time employee. Would you do that?" And I was 27. And so I thought, gosh, like, if ever there's time to take a career risk, now's the time. I wasn't married, I didn't have kids. I already knew the organization. I knew there was a market need for what SEPA was doing. And I saw the, sort of the potential to really grow it. So I made the jump and went back to SEPA as employee number one and really sort of wiped the slate clean and started over. And I should say also, when the board came to ask me to do that, they said, we have option A. We had a board meeting yesterday. We have option A, option B. Option A is you're going to come sort of turn this around for us. And option B is if you say no, we're actually going to dissolve the organization.
Oh, wow.
So no pressure,
I was going to say that's a heavy load to carry.
Yeah. But again, because they had been my client for years, I knew what I was getting into. And I was confident that there was real need and that well managed, the organization would do well. So I went back and started running the organization in January of 2004, and was there through the end of 2022. Again, started as employee number one. Now, gosh, the organization is 60 some people, I think. And obviously over that time, as mentioned, I started, one of the very first things I did was start this Solar Power International conference, which grew into RE+. And about 2009, 2010, spun that out into an LLC that has its own, own staff, own CEO and its own staff, but, continued to, for a long time, serve as board chair and co-chair together with my peer CEO at SIA, who was our partner on the event, and still remain on the board for that today. So anyway, so that was sort of my long, almost 20 years of running SEPA, or 18 years plus of running SEPA. And then sort of post-COVID was hard as a CEO. And so I was sort of done after that. And I knew I didn't want to be a CEO anymore. So I gave my board notice that I was going to step down and we should start looking for whoever was going to take over for me. And and my plan was that I was going to retire from SEPA and I never wanted to work full-time again. I was going to serve on a couple of boards and that was it. And that's what I did for 14 months. But in addition to serving on a couple of boards, I was also serving as a senior advisor to the Ad Hoc Group. The CEO, Jim Capsis, was an old friend. And so I was spending a couple of hours a week advising them. But just over that 14 months of really having, I really was working like 5 hours or less a week for about 14 months, but just fell in love with the team at the Ad Hoc and the work that they were doing, the clients, and said, you know what, like as much fun as I'm having being retired, I actually think I will have even more fun going back to work and becoming a partner at the Ad Hoc Group. So as of March of this year, that's what I'm doing. And that's Amazing. How I got here.
Very good.
Love that. That's such a great career trajectory. And as we were talking ahead of time, you're a connector, and I love that about you. Tell us a little bit about what got you excited at the Ad Hoc Group. Like what made you want to come out of retirement, I guess, and dedicate more time to the organization.
Yes. So the Ad Hoc Group is it's a really boutique advisory firm. So we're about 20 people now, although 2 years ago it was 5 or 6 people. So we're growing quickly. We're about 20 full-time staff. We have an advisor of senior advisors, of which I was one previously, but retired utility executives, former state utility commissioners, and other former executives with a lot of expertise. But our clients are climate tech startups. So really across a variety of different climate tech segments, but a heavy focus on the energy industry, specifically, electric and gas. and mobility. And so we help our startup clients really with sort of policy and market development work, business development and sales support, and then helping them actually bring people into their firm. So we do search for our clients as well. And really our goal is to put ourselves out of a job, right, for each client. We come in typically when they're Series A, Series B, help them for 2 to 4 years, really build their internal knowledge and capabilities, and to the point where we're no longer needed anymore and we can move on to the next startup. But really, the exciting thing for me, it goes back to the connector thing, right? So in order for us to be successful helping our clients, we spent a huge amount of our time connecting our climate tech startup clients with electric utilities, with state regulatory commissioners, with big C&I customers, and really helping. Again, it's a dot connecting thing, and it's helping these startups form the relationships with the people that they need to know, either as potential customers or as partners, or influencers in the case of the regulators. And so that's just what excited me. It's almost like a reverse, because at SEPA has a very broad membership, but at its core are the electric utilities, and then sort of everyone else, the technology companies and the regulators and the large users all sort of sit and surround them. And at the Ad Hoc, it's the flip of that, where it's the technology companies that are at the core, but it's the utilities and the regulators and the large commercial customers that sort of surround that. And so that was really what was exciting to me, was, being able to use my skill set and experience to do what I'd always done to be successful, but sort of through a different lens or a different perspective, primarily a different perspective. And then the other piece was just, because I had the experience being CEO at SEPA and growing it from 1 to 50 plus people, the idea of coming into the Ad Hoc Group at this point in its growth was really compelling to me too, because, and it's been fun over the past couple of months to be like, hey, I've had this growth pain before, and I know what we do about it. I know how to fix this. So it was really a combination of those two things, both the sort of the connector role, but through a different lens or sort of primary focus, and the opportunity to help grow a business again.
And I bet you're able to not only help your internal team navigate kind of startup growth pains, essentially, but you're also able to help the startups you're supporting and those CEOs to learn from your experiences. Yes.
Yeah. I haven't necessarily dove in headfirst there yet, but I'm sure it's coming.
Yeah. And so, arguably, you're involved in the energy transformation through some of the most kind of conflicting times where there wasn't necessarily clarity on where it was heading, what was happening, whether people believed in a need for it or not. What did you learn over the last 20 years with SEPA that you now are applying to what you're doing? And where do you see the next 20 years heading with respect to the energy transformation process?
The biggest thing is, to me, around partnership. It's about the value and the importance of partnership, and that no one player or stakeholder can do it alone, right? I mean, the challenge we have in front of us with this energy transition and sort of decarbonizing our economy is going to take everybody. Everybody has a role to play, and it has to be done in a collaborative, coordinated fashion for it to be successful. And that does go back to SEPA's roots. SEPA was founded in the early 90s to run a public-private partnership with the Department of Energy that most people have no idea that this is even what happened. But SEPA, through Department of Energy, funded the first 1,100 grid-connected PV systems in the U.S. And so, and it was called Team Up, was the acronym, which stood for Technology Experiences to Accelerate Markets in Utility Photovoltaics, Team Up. And the funding, you had to put together a team, and the team had to include a utility. And most teams then also obviously had to have a solar company, like a manufacturer, but also a local installation community, but also other community groups. And so these teams got funding to do these very early stage installations and actually the money paid for the hardware. And then in return, these 1,100 systems through these teams had to give all of their data back to SEPA, their cost data, the performance data, their O&M data. There were like 7 different categories of data that they had to give back to us in exchange for getting the funding. And we would do the analysis to identify trends and really educate then the whole industry about different solar applications and what the costs were and where we're still what still needed more focus in terms of performance and all of these things. And so that partnership is what jump-started the US solar market. And most people who are in the solar industry have never heard that story. They have no idea that happened. And so, that to me, just that type of partnership is so meaningful. And it's just a great example of something that can be replicated. And DOE has done some other things over the years that are sort of similar in nature that require, entities to come together in partnership in order to jumpstart new technologies.
Love that. Internally, one of our core values is empower co-creation, because we completely agree with you that there's no silver bullet to this. It takes all people of all backgrounds, of all skills and capabilities being enabled to come together and actually execute at scale. So love that story, and thanks for sharing. From your perspective, how are utilities today embracing the transition to these distributed energy assets? So obviously you led that program and that was the start of it. And sort of moving past where we are today, how can they do a better job, even though they're going to be serving less load, which has ultimately been their business model? The load demands are increasing, they're going through the roof. They can't necessarily keep up with the current load demands. If we deploy more distributed energy, maybe there's less of their direct load to control, but there's ultimately a huge opportunity for them to control other loads. How do you feel like they're doing on that front, and how can we encourage more utilities to maybe embrace distributed energy so we're not reliant on big utility scale projects which take a lot of time and energy?
Yeah, well, and I think we need both. I mean, I will say, I do think that the challenge in front of us is so significant that we need all the distributed generation we can get, as well as all of the new large scale, zero emissions, new facilities that we can build. I do think we are at a point in time where the perspective has very much shifted for utilities, because for a long time, utilities were seeing zero load growth, and in many cases, even declining load growth. And in that situation, as a for-profit business, right, in the case of investor-owned utilities, it is really hard to justify, doing things that result in selling less of your product. But we are at a point now where, largely because of data centers, AI, electrification, utilities are again now seeing load growth, and that pace of load growth is going to start accelerating even more at an exponential level. So utilities now need as much power as they can get from any source that they can get it from that meets their decarbonization objectives. So it's a very different, very different lens to look at things through. And I think very much shifts the perspective of utilities when it comes to distributed generation. And there's still lots of challenges. And at SEPA and now at the Ad Hoc Group, still spend a lot of time with state regulatory commissions, because in my mind, that really is the key to all of this. There's so much regulatory change that's needed in order to make sure that, okay, yes, on a big picture, utilities now need the generation to be coming from everywhere it can. But from a business model standpoint, they're still not incentivized to make that happen. They're still essentially penalized for that to happen. So, we need to, and it's happening, right? But slowly. It's just not happening as fast as we need it to, in terms of thinking about, how do we move to a place where we have performance-based regulation, where, utilities aren't simply just earning based on their deployment of capital into physical, into poles and wires and, other pieces of equipment. And by selling electrons, to a place where they're earning based on meeting the social objectives that we have as a society, right? And so, that can be, things related, everything from, how decarbonized is the portfolio of generation that they're providing, to their customer satisfaction, to how reliable and resilient the system is, like all of these different performance metrics that, especially, I should say, affordability as well, right? Affordability, we cannot forget about affordability in this. What needs to happen in the coming years is incredible in terms of the amount of investment that's needed in the system, because we now need this orchestration of all of it, and our system's not ready for that. So we need a lot of investment to make it ready. And so, so again, I go back to the commissions and really trying to figure out how do we speed up the pace of regulatory change. And with that, and goes hand in hand, is risk, right? A real big challenge for utilities, because they're so highly regulated, is they're by their nature very risk averse. Mm-hmm. And so, how do we change the dynamics from a regulatory perspective? Utilities need to culturally change the dynamic around sort of acceptance of risk. But it also it's driven by, and all my videos is going to have these thumbs up everywhere. But how do we make it so that utilities are incentivized to take appropriate risk in terms of new technology, and really like getting beyond this piloting things to death, right? We have a tendency as an industry to say, okay, here's this new technology, we'll do a small pilot, and then, nothing happens with it. Or even if all of these other utilities have already piloted it and rolled it out in full scale, each utility still feels like it needs to do its own pilot. We have to get past that. We really have to get to the point of scaling at a much faster pace. And so, again, how do we sort of make sure that the utility business model incentivizes the changes that we want to see? And then how do we also sort of change the risk profile, which is very closely sort of tied into that regulatory issue?
Yeah, big challenge, and as you said, like it's we're at this interesting inflection point. I think, curious, you have an extremely unique lens across utility, new emerging technologies, and commercial industrial businesses. And as you know, many of our listeners are commercial industrial business leaders. How would you kind of help them think through how they should be thinking about the energy transition and the changes? We often hear, man, I haven't really thought about it before. Now, over the last 2-3 years, we've been forced to think about it. It's become a topic in our boardroom, largely because of costs going up, but also through concerns about reliability and decarbonization efforts. But oftentimes they don't feel like they want to wait for the utilities to go through this big change that you just described. Mm-hmm. How should business leaders, especially those that are large energy consumers with dozens, hundreds of facilities, how should they be thinking about this? And what are some of the considerations they should make as they look ahead in the next 2, 5, 10 years?
Yeah, so we actually are doing a lot of this work at the Ad Hoc Group. One of our clients is a relatively new company, but it comes out of a company that's been around for a long time, and it's called True Current. And their first big customer is US Foods. So we are actively working with True Current and US Foods on exactly what you're talking about. And it's about creating a roadmap, right? Like, we can't boil the ocean overnight, right? Like, we've really got to think about, okay, where are we trying to, any given C&I customer needs to think about, where are we trying to get to over a much longer term time frame? And then let's work backwards from there to create a roadmap on, okay, here, first we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, like really clearly map out the path forward. And it's about, it does take a lot of time and effort to think about, in the case of US Foods, they have many distribution centers across the entire country. And so, thinking about and understanding the utility rate structures in each service territory where they have a distribution center, thinking about what incentives are available there, understanding what their truck routes are, in terms of fleet electrification, and thinking about like what's just the regulatory environment and sort of appetite for this type of transition. And so it does take like a lot of actual analysis to determine, okay, if I have 500 sites across the country, you have to do a lot of analysis to figure out, like, prioritize those 500 sites to say we should do these 3 first, right? And let's do these 3 and gather learnings from those. And then we're going to tackle the next and the next. But again, do it in a very thoughtful, managed way, because just to think about it is simply overwhelming. And my sense is that is where a lot of C&I customers are right now, is like, it's just, even the thought of it is so overwhelming. It's like, I don't even know where to start. Like, where do I start? And I think you have to start by, really, again, having the right partners who can help with the analysis to create the roadmap. And then, then actually have the right partners to help execute on a step-by-step process.
Yeah. Yeah, we have huge empathy for business leaders because you're spot on. They're busy trying to run their business and they've never actually really had to think about energy. And now it's become one of these top priority factors. And they go, where do I even begin? Who do I turn to? What's possible? And to your point, where do I start? And how do I take those baby steps? Because many people are just frozen at step 0.
Yeah.
But it gets easier as you start taking those steps, and it starts compounding the value as well, doesn't it?
Right. And I think one of the things that I will point out, and this is true with utilities as well, but C&I customers, like thinking about creating at the very beginning a cross-functional senior level team within the company, because I think what a lot of companies don't really internalize until they've already started down the path is like, you can't just have, even if you have an energy team or an energy person, or a sustainability officer, this transition within a big corporation touches every function at some point. And so, especially if you're a big company, and things are siloed, you can't just leave it to this group of people over here responsible for energy or sustainability. You need a cross-functional senior level team who are involved from the beginning and both sort of bought into the roadmap at first, but then B, actually like responsible for making sure that the execution is moving forward. Because again, people from all of those teams across the entire company are going to need to be involved in order to execute successfully.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Interestingly, like just a personal lesson learned yesterday was I was quoted in an article trying to say something to that effect, Julia, saying there's many different stakeholders and we need to be able to talk to them in their own specific language. And unfortunately, someone who read that thought I was talking about like different dialect languages and took offense to. And so I think massive lesson learned for me that we have to be very conscious about the language we use. But at the same time, I think the message carries very strongly, doesn't it? It's like people think in different ways and they have different roles and responsibilities, and they need to be presented with sets of data and insights that reflect their area of expertise. And I think a wonderful point. And I'm learning a lot through trying to communicate to multiple stakeholders in this regard. So, and up until now, Julia, for many businesses, because of it being such a complex, overwhelming problem statement without having that data and insights, the typical kind of knee-jerk reaction has been, I've got a decarbonization goal. Let's just go and buy some renewable energy credits or sign a offsite power purchase agreement. And that's what we see in the press, don't we? Microsoft becomes net zero or net positive. Right. And it's not all about reducing their carbon emissions directly. It's contractually buying them somewhere else. How do you think that's working in the industry? Do you think it's helping us achieve our goals? And if not, what would your recommendation to business leaders be?
I'd say that's a tool in the toolkit.
Yeah.
Right. It is not the only tool. It shouldn't be the only tool. It's certainly, again, because let's be frank, and we've already talked about this, it does take a long time for a single corporation to change all of its operations to get to a point of actually being able to be net zero.
Yeah.
So, the idea of being able to do something that's a very sort of quick, easy fix, right? It's not fix, but like a quick, easy move,
Yep.
Is appealing, but it can't be instead of doing all of these other things. It has to be in addition to, right? And so that might be a nice near-term thing while you are making progress on electrifying your fleet, making sure that all of your facilities are as energy efficient as possible, all of the other things that you need, putting solar and storage everywhere you can, that your facility will accommodate. All of those things have to be happening in parallel, but it should not. So I think that's my bottom line, right? It shouldn't be a one or the other. It should be in addition to.
Yeah, thank you. We share that sentiment and that resonates. I was encouraged. I was on the phone with a company with 1,500 facilities the other day, and they had just signed a big power purchase agreement that said they meets a bit over 100% of their current electrical load across the company. But to your point, they know that that's not the end. They know that they've got a massive fleet of vehicles and they're going to be electrifying those. And so they kind of felt like, okay, we signed this, we're okay for the moment, but now we're starting to put together the pieces for all of the next things, and we're going to be growing as an organization, and so our load is going to grow. And so I think that's a critical component is it is a tool in the toolkit. We're firm believers that it starts with efficiency and then maximizing on-site and then using some of these more broad strokes levers. That's really great. Tying back to your utility time, how do you think utilities can help support that at a greater scale and support businesses in doing this?
Very specific recent example of this where, there was a company who, again, has many facilities across the country and a lot of different service territories. And they are getting to work on sort of focusing on one of their distribution centers as their first big decarbonization effort. And really building that one out as a showcase and sort of a lesson for how they plan to then do all of their other distribution centers in the country. And I was helping connect them with the utility senior level, executive level people with the utility that serves that particular distribution center. And what we discovered was that company used to have a dedicated customer service representative, but no longer did, because the utility said, well, nothing's been happening with that customer in this facility for years. We didn't need to have somebody dedicated to them. But now they know. So we met with them and we said, well, here's their decarbonization plan. And so literally within days, they had an account representative assigned to them who can help sort of shepherd them through, help them work through all of the challenges within the utility and connect with the right people. And, so I actually sort of then reached, sort of back out to at the very top of that utility and said, hey, I just want to flag for you, this is, yes, thank you for helping this company. But I hope you also think about this, that there are probably lots of other large customers you have who you no longer have account reps assigned to them because you assume they don't have real sort of day-to-day needs, who probably now have pretty significant sustainability plans. And so maybe, hopefully you might want to get ahead of this, right? And actually look at your large customers who don't have account reps and see whether you should reassign account reps to those, knowing that they have, imminent plans to begin making changes at the facilities. So very specific example, but right. I mean, it's very those are the types of operational things that can make things really hard if you don't have somebody within a utility who is there to be your point person and your champion and help you navigate the complexities of your, electricity provider.
Yeah, great example. And I think it highlights to me how we're transitioning from these being consumers, one-way relationships with the utilities where they just are providing it and it happens and we consume it and we don't need much support because that's just how it is, versus transitioning into this prosumer where we're actually having a deeper level of interaction with the utility and with the grid, and we're feeding to them, they're feeding to us, and we're participating in demand management and all that. So I hope that we see that trend growing of the utilities wanting to develop that relationship and foster that interaction. Do you see others? Do you see it's the early stages of that happening?
I do. I think in early stages is still the right label. But so, I think in certain markets where, customers are for whatever reasons they have, whether it's driven by policy or, investor sentiment or customer sentiment, in places where, they might be a little farther ahead, the utilities are taking action. I would say generally across the country, though, all utilities understand that this is where things are going, and that is going to require them to begin sort of changing, how they think about these issues. But, for some, it is still very early days, and, they don't have a lot of C&I customers that are doing a whole lot yet, but they know it's coming.
I'm for those C&I customers, Julia. We see this as being like an incredible way to differentiate your business and manage your costs, make sure you're operationally resilient, reduce your emissions, win more contracts, get access to capital, attract the best employees.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to C&I business leaders who are sat there kind of wondering, like, should I be committing time and energy to this now, or is it something that I should continue to defer on?
No, I think you just listed off all the reasons. I think every C&I business should be thinking about this, right? And, everyone needs to get started somewhere. You don't have to take huge steps to get started. You can take baby steps. Not every company necessarily, I talked about before, creating a roadmap that looks out sort of what your end objective is, but not every company needs to start there either, right? You don't need to have a roadmap in order to get started. You can just begin doing the low hanging fruit and the easy things, and yeah, some things cost more than others, but my guess is for pretty much every business out there, there is something they could be doing that would be improving their bottom line today. And so start with those things, right? The things that are no regrets moves, right? You're going to improve your bottom line and get all of those other benefits you just mentioned. But also, thinking about resiliency is, for me, a huge piece of it, because no matter where you are in the country, whether it's hurricanes or floods or ice storms or wildfires, just keep listing the natural disasters, they're getting more frequent, they're getting more severe. And so, for business to lose power for any amount of time, it's huge impact to the bottom line. And so there are things that you can do that, it'll require and may require investment, but that investment is going to have a huge ROI if it means that you don't have to stop your operations for 2 hours, 4 hours, 4 days, if something happens, and you're ultimately going to not be able to operate.
Absolutely.
Incredibly insightful. And we completely agree. This has been amazing, but if you're up for it, we can shift gears a bit into the power surge questions. I don't know if you fully prepared for these. I'll kick it off. I'll kick it off. If you could be any energy technology, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I was fun thinking about this. And I'm going to give the boring answer that I would be the poles and wires of the T&D system because I like to be the connector.
Yes. That might be the first. I think we got transmission at one point, but I like that. Poles and wires. And so tell a little bit more.
Well, like I was saying, earlier in the interview, I'm passionate about connecting people and things. And so, I think about the power system and all of the different, yes, there's lots of individual cool technologies, but just, I want to be the thing that makes them all work and be able to work in a coordinated fashion and just ties it all together. And, and that's the thing. It's like, distributed energy by itself is fantastic, right? I just had the solar installed. I have a new house. My solar was just installed. Actually, I just got the approval from the utility and the interconnection on Monday. And I turned off the disconnect switch. I have two EVs in my garage, and I'm waiting for the day. I do not get batteries because I plan to use my EV. I plan to use the solar to charge my cars, and then have my cars be able to power my house when the grid goes down. And so all of that is valuable for me individually, but that doesn't mean I want to go off grid, right? I still want to be connected to the system and ultimately, be able to have the financial benefit of sharing that electricity with others when I'm not using it, and sort of all of these things. And without the poles and wires, none of that is possible. So, to me, there will always be a role or a value in sort of having the utility who is the orchestrator essentially and the connector of all the cool stuff. And so, that would be why.
That's awesome. And Julie, you've obviously enjoyed a bit of a career break the last 18 months or so. Two questions. First of all, how important was that to you? And for others that are thinking about it, what would be your recommendation? Was it worth the decompress? And then two, what resources stood out to you in terms of books, podcasts, newsletters that you really enjoyed and valued being able to stay up to date in the market?
Yeah, well, yes, I absolutely, recommend the career break to everyone who is fortunate enough to be able to take one, right? Not everybody is in that position. But, I think I said this earlier, like, I didn't think I was taking a career break. I thought I was done with my career. But now that I know it was just a break, I realize how valuable it was. And it did give me time. I thought I was done. So, coming back, I've had so many people reach out to me to say, I left my job of, 20 years also, and I thought I was going to retire, but now I'm really bored and I don't know what to do. And how did you find that thing you wanted to do? And I was like, I wasn't looking for it. It just sort of came to me. Right. But yeah, it just incredibly valuable. And I think we're really fortunate. And to some degree, I think COVID helped this in terms of the societal perspective on career breaks is much more accepted than it was before, is my sense. So, pre-COVID, if I had seen a big gap on someone's resume, I definitely would have, at least I wouldn't have necessarily disregarded them, but I would have been wondering what the heck was going on. Whereas now, hopefully they have it labeled on their resume as career break. And I'm like, awesome, that's great. I'm glad they did that. Let's get them in here for an interview, So hopefully other leaders are thinking in that similar vein. I don't know if that's true or not. And I will admit, because I thought I was retiring, other than my board service, you know what? I really disconnected. I was not listening to podcasts. I was not reading things. And I'm back now, but I've been sort of just getting reemerged. So I'm, I actually been thinking I don't even know what the current good stuff is. So I need other people's recommendations.
Well, add renewable rides to your podcast listening.
Yeah. And I will. So a little, sort of self promotion here for my firm. And we do have a great newsletter. So I should put that out there. It's called The Gist. So the firm again is the Ad Hoc Group. Our newsletter, it's monthly. It's The Gist. So every month sort of starts with a pretty meaty article on a particular topic, either an article or an interview. And then, sort of highlights what's happening with different climate tech startups. There's a section on jobs that are different companies in our network are looking to fill. So it's a really great, and it's fun. The team who does it, making sure that it's a fun read is a big priority for us.
Great. Yeah, we can link off to that in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
Finally, what does this statement look like for you personally or professionally in the context of our global energy future? In my life, I will have been successful when?
Thought I had thought about this one in advance, but now I don't remember what my answer was going to be. I will have been successful when, I guess I will say, this is not very quantitative, but I will have been successful when utilities can quickly adopt and scale new technology.
Love that. Good one.
Much needed.
And Julia, just to close out, if anyone wants to hang out with you, find you, follow you, where are they best going?
LinkedIn, definitely LinkedIn. I used to be all over Twitter, but I've during my career break, I stopped and I haven't returned to X. So yeah, LinkedIn's definitely the best way. Please feel free to anyone to request a connection, and I will be sure to accept.
That's great. And any closing comments?
No, this has been fun. Thanks for having me.
You've been awesome. Thank you for everything you've done in your career. Excited to see this next chapter, and we'll be sure to check out the Ad Hoc Group. So thanks, Julia.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia.
Dan, what about that? Julia was awesome, wasn't she?
Wow, what a background, what an experience. Excited for her that she got re-energized in her time of decompression to come back and help accelerate this transition. We need all the great minds and passionate people that we can get. What were some of your reflections?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me was like the utilities are making a transition, but it's slow, and the rules of the game make it very challenging for them. And I love the fact that she highlighted that for commercial industrial business leaders and for our listeners, it's all about, having that game plan, understanding that energy is truly a differentiator in terms of how you can leverage it to optimize your business. And there's those no regret decisions that have really quick and powerful returns on investment that can be implemented now. So take those first steps, see the benefit, celebrate the benefits, and then use that to springboard into having a roadmap for how you can do this at scale. And I think particularly doing it with multiple stakeholders across your organization, because this can't be done in isolation because it touches so many parts of our businesses. So that was the biggest takeaway for me. What about you?
Building on that, I think you mentioned it touches on so many parts of the business, touches on so many parts of the industry. Her passion, and clearly based on everything she's done in her career of connecting people, is one, infectious, but two, really aligns with our core value of empowering co-creation and ensuring that people within an organization can work together, because that is required, especially as she really touched on eloquently there. But then also ensuring that the right parties come to the table, and it's more often than not more than one party that needs to come to the table to actually make these projects happen and make the transition happen. We need more connectivity, and hopefully we can be a big part of driving that as we continue on ahead. So I thought really loved her energy, unintended, and I look forward to continuing to learn from her and collaborate with her in the future.
Yeah, and hopefully we're now added to top of a resource of choice for going forward and staying educated on what's going on in the industry. So welcome back, Julia, and excited to see what you're going to do in this next chapter. Cool. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, guys.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.